Welcome to the Penn Humanities Forum. I'm Jim English. I'm the director of the forum. I want to thank you all on behalf of Team Forum, Jennifer Conway, the associate director, Sarah Varney, the business, design, and tech wizard, Elizabeth Delazazzara, who's our research fellow and microphone handler at the end of the talks, and Chiming Yang, my distinguished colleague in the English department and the topic director for this year's program on color. This is the 9th event in that series, Public Art and the Neighborhoods of Philadelphia. Next week, the 25th of February, same place and time, we have David Eagleman, a neuroscientist who does some pretty rarefied, high-tech research on the brain, but manages to explain that research and its implications for art and culture and everyday life to the rest of us who don't do rarefied high-tech research on the brain. I think it's going to be an exciting event, so I urge you to come out again on what will probably be another chilly evening. He's going to be talking about synesthesia, the phenomenon of hearing in color or tasting in color. Our presentation tonight has a number of moving pieces. It involves 4 speakers, so I'm going to clear away from the podium quickly. I do want to introduce Professor Amy Hillier, who's going to conduct the conversation with our panelists. Amy holds positions on the faculty of 2 schools at Penn, the School of Design and the School of Social Policy and Practice, and we're trying in the School of Arts and Sciences to get as big a piece of her as we can in our school as well. She's done a lot for our initiatives in digital humanities recently. Amy's research focuses on the ways that the built urban environment can affect disadvantaged communities. She's focused much of her research here on Philadelphia. She's done important work on the historical mapping of race and class in this city with a project called the W.E.B. Du Bois 7th Ward Project. That research brought her into, I think, maybe the first collaboration she's had with the Mural Arts Program, but I'll let her tell you about that in her own fashion. So Amy Hillier is going to get us started and set things up for the panel. Please welcome her.
Thanks, Jim. It's a real honor to be here tonight and to be part of this broader forum, which is a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue between artists and humanities scholars and others who are working at this intersection of color and meaning. And tonight we get to talk specifically about murals and the process of making murals and how that contributes to making meaning for places and for people here in the city of Philadelphia. So some big topics. What does it mean to live in Philadelphia in one of our neighborhoods at this particular moment in time? How do we overcome the racial, the ethnic, the geographic, the cultural, economic divisions? What makes us feel whole? And how do we feel hope in the midst of lots of suffering and lots of inequity? So I don't have to answer those questions. We brought some really great folks in to think about these broader issues about meaning and murals. And I'll introduce them a little bit more later, but the tireless leader of mural arts, Jane Golden, and 2 really talented muralists, Betsy Casañas and Ernel Martinez, are here to contribute to this conversation, to jumpstart this conversation. And then I'll try to get them talking to each other and then bring you folks in because that's the whole idea about dialogue. But I think we have a really rich content to talk about tonight, and I think probably every single one of us has some kind of connection to one or more murals in the city. Before I introduce our guest, though, I want to tell you about my connection to mural arts, which I think is what earned me this special invitation. So in 1896, the great scholar and civil rights leader W.E.B. Du Bois came to Philadelphia at the invitation of Penn to do a study of the 7th Ward neighborhood downtown. And he thought of it as a rather patronizing invitation because he thought the women who invited him from the College Settlement Association already sort of had figured out what was wrong. And they said they were talking about the Negro problem, that somehow the people, the black people of the 7th Ward were somehow a problem. And he really masterfully came to Philadelphia, wrote a book called The Philadelphia Negro that Penn published in 1899, and pretty masterfully reframed the discussion to be about the problems that blacks were facing. The blacks were not the problems. The blacks were systematically facing discrimination. He did this really tremendous study that in many ways is a work of social science. But in its really core themes, it really is about the full humanity, embracing the full humanity of all people. And the project that I have going calls on some of that work to challenge us today, to really complete his vision for embracing the full humanity of all of the people. And we were really privileged to get to work with Mural Arts to make more obvious what maybe is not obvious in that neighborhood. This is at 6th and South Street, the 7th Ward that Du Bois studied and knocked on doors, door to door, and lived in for a while. The Mural Arts responded to an unsolicited application from a social work student and me, and wonderfully, it coincided with interest from the fire department, which was a segregated black fire department right there on South Street, to have a mural. And I thought it was one of the more brilliant, more strategic decisions to say, hey, why don't we put these together? So thank you, Jane. And I remember a really snowy day in the dead of winter going up to Mural Arts to first talk about this. Just want to point out a couple of things about color that are really relevant. Du Bois made a map of the 7th Ward, and this mural is called Mapping Courage. And he did this based on a door-to-door survey, and he color-coded all the households based on social class status. And he used terms like vicious and criminal, and some things that might sound a little patronizing. I mean, this was the Victorian era, of course. But he was really making a claim about the full humanity of blacks and saying there's social class status in the black community just like there is in any white community. And so this map, the beautiful rendition by the artist, to make the map, which is in the background, and to color code the people in the painting to represent different social class. I think this is an example of, there's no way, as many people as I talked to about this book, that I could touch nearly as many people and share this story with nearly as many people as this mural can. This was one of many murals that's had a community paint day where they invited folks to come and to help paint the mural, the first coat of the mural, which was just a fabulous day. It was a sunny day in May. It was really fun. This is the muralist, Willis. And there was also Jimmy Callanan, the white man there, lives in the 7th Ward, and found out through sort of happen chance that a descendant of the black woman who was born in his house at the turn of the century, when the 7th Ward was predominantly black. So Ronnie's great-grandmother was from the 7th Ward. Her son and grandchildren, like 5 generations essentially, came and contributed to painting the mural. And if you look in this sort of section right here, this is their grandmother, the woman in the green, and I think just a tremendous story. And I can only imagine the rich stories behind all the other murals and all the other special connections, historical, but also personal connections that are celebrated in these murals. And I should say that I've been at Penn for 20 years, and it's a great privilege to work at this institution. I've had a lot of great days. More than not, my days at work are great. But I think in terms of work days, the day that we had the dedication for that mural was the best day of my work life. W.E.B. Du Bois' great-grandson was here to celebrate with us, and the mayor, and some kids playing drums. I mean, it was really a spectacular day. I want to transition just real quick to maybe more specifically what we're going to talk about with the Porch Light project. You guys might not have seen this before, but Sarah Ansel, I supervise social work students from the School of Social Policy and Practice because my training is in social work. And Sarah was one of my field placement students. She worked with me mostly on public health research, but certainly knew about the Du Bois project. She went on to work for Mural Arts for some time with the Porch Light project, and then her involvement was celebrated in one of the publications that the School of Social Policy and Practice put out. And what's really exciting for me is that this project, which we're going to hear a lot more about tonight, really takes the creation of murals and the messages in murals to a new level in terms of healing, in terms of wellness, in terms of health, public health, resilience, transformation. I mean, these are the kinds of things we talk about in social science and city planning, and sort of in my other non-historical work. And I'm really excited to hear you folks talk about some of the backstories about the Porch Light project. I think many of you already know Jane Golden, who is tireless in efforts to seek funding and to seek new walls, and to spread the gallery, the mural gallery, around our city. And she's very generous about sharing the story of mural arts and in teaching here at Penn. I think if you don't know her, it's obvious when she speaks that the motivation really comes from a deep love of the city and for the role of public art. And fortunately, the city has recognized that and recognized her with a number of honors, including Distinguished Daughter of Pennsylvania and the Philadelphia Award. But I think that the kind of motivation comes from somewhere much deeper. The two muralists with us tonight, Betsy Casañas is a muralist, also a community activist, and an educator. And I think that's one thing that we'll see here, artists as educators and community organizers playing a broad role. She co-founded a group called the Mural Arts, which is a grassroots initiative, and more recently opened a Seed of Diamond Gallery, which is a community space for artists of different cultural backgrounds. So we look forward to hearing more from you about that. And Ernel Martinez, who is from Belize, studied here at Penn with the late Terry Atkin, who was my colleague in the School of Design and another lover of Du Bois, and someone who honored Du Bois' work in some different ways with printmaking. Ernel's been involved with 25 murals across the city, and also works as an instructor, as an educator. So we're thrilled to have you here. We're going to watch the Porch Light video, and then we look forward to having each of you speak.
My name is Antoine, and I'm an addict.
I'm coming up on 2 years clean of drug and alcohol.
My name is Bruce. I have 10 months clean. I want to get involved in anything they have to offer here, everything.
Thanks for being here.
The Porch Light initiative is an innovative collaboration between the city's behavioral health system and the city's Mural Arts Program. And our goal really is to improve the behavioral health status of both individuals and the community at large. Because of the stigma associated with behavioral health conditions, such as mental illness and substance use, people often don't reach out for help. And if we don't change our paradigm, people who need our help are not going to access care.
This is not about the counselor saying, okay, well, here's your treatment plan. This is what you're going to do. These are your goals. Now sign here. It's really about what do you need in order to have a fulfilling life? We're interested in your life.
Life can be very difficult in some of the communities that we're working in. People have significant economic challenges, they have social challenges.
Today's the 26th of January, the 26th day of the year, and there's already been 37 murders. Yeah. Okay?
I grew up in probably the biggest drug market in Philadelphia, so I understand. We have to focus on the things that bring people together as a community. What can you do to change this?
The purpose of the Porch Light Initiative is to use art to enhance mental health resources in parts of the city that are struggling, and to use art to overcome the stigma of mental illness, addiction, and homelessness. And really the beauty of this work, it's really about partnership and collaboration. We're working with the City of Philadelphia, the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, and then we're working with these wonderful provider agencies, APM, the 11th Street Family Services, Sobriety Through Outpatient, Project Home. They work with the city's most vulnerable population. They were open to embracing non-traditional ways of working, and they wanted to deliver mental health services that resonated with people in the deepest way possible.
It's about what you bring to this community, and we wanted to really talk about what our strengths are and then how that can translate into the mural.
The mural is a byproduct. What we're involved in is social transformation, and the vehicle we use is art. This program is very rigorous. There are workshops over long periods of time. The artists work carefully and deliberately with participants.
We started creating these lists of things that we feel make a community strong. The ingredients for the soup, I guess, that is the design.
There's a layered feel to this that I like.
You guys, I don't know if you're ready for this, but we're painting today.
All right, you get some paint. Yeah. It's humongous. And that's just part of his sleeve. I'm gonna go with R side.
The process that people go through when they're addressing their own personal recovery, it is a transformative process. And in a similar way, art is a transformative process.
Down there, back there. Okay. I'm gonna see this on the wall. I feel great because I know I contributed to it.
I'll go home and say I had a good day and looking forward to come back tomorrow to finish this.
Oh, this is nice. I like this.
We just can't wait for people to come into treatment and then discharge them back to communities. We really have to understand how those communities help to support people's health.
Mural arts really demystifies mental illness and addiction. And our design, our evaluation design, tries to capture that. What we've come to find is that the people who participate do feel a sense of hopefulness about the future, a reduced sense of stigma. They also report a sense of connectedness to their community that they didn't prior to that. Both the individuals in the clinic and community members create this public narrative around mental illness, recovery, trauma, that is healing.
Oh, that's nice.
Thank you for being a part of our community. It identifying with something positive.
When you see murals like this, it helps people to understand recovery is possible.
What we see by providing beauty and hope, people start to see themselves in terms of their potential.
The Porch Light has gave me that opportunity to find me, you know. So I really enjoyed it, and I'd like to thank y'all.
So hi everyone, thank you for coming tonight. Amy, thank you. That was a wonderful introduction, and working with you has been really inspiring. And I want to acknowledge my two extraordinary colleagues here. Mural arts would not exist without the wonder and genius of the fantastic artists and muralists that I work with, and I'm really humbled to be with them. So I want to give you, I assume that many of you know about mural arts, so I want to talk about Porch Light and how it started, and then what we're up to now and why we're doing this and what our vision is. And I'll try to do that in 10 minutes. And if I probably can't, but then you'll ask questions and I'll be happy to give you any information. Porch Light, for me, it's a very inspiring part of mural arts. Mural arts has grown exponentially over the last 5-6 years. Not only has our artistic practice expanded tremendously in that we're not just doing murals, we're doing all kinds of work, but also the depth and breadth of our programming has expanded as well. And I think what we have tried to do repeatedly and intentionally is be really responsive to the needs of the city of Philadelphia. So any issue that's on the desk of Mayor Nutter and City Council and commissioners and deputy mayors, they have to be issues that we are thinking about and acting on. I am a huge believer in the fact that when it comes to some of society's most intractable problems, that we can never discount the role of innovation and creativity to make a difference, because our traditional interventions often fail us. So we need to think out of the box. And when I say think out of the box, it makes me think of our mental health commissioner in this city, Dr. Arthur Evans, because that is who he is. It defines him. And I met him about 10 years ago. Under former Mayor John Street, we were made part of the Division of Social Services. It was a life-changing moment for mural arts, because suddenly we were working with kids who were truant and delinquent, and working in prisons, and working with the Department of Behavioral Health. And Estelle Richmond, who was the managing director, believed in an integrated model of government, but also believed that art should be part of how big departments do business. I mean, how enlightening is that, right? So suddenly I saw myself, someone really low on the food chain, right? I was suddenly at a table with these commissioners who were big thinkers and had giant budgets. And I'd be like, oh my God, note to self, like follow them, get in the elevator with them, you know, go across the street, hover outside their office. I'm like a total pest. Don't ever, like, don't go away till you like strike a deal. So I started working in this area of social services, and it brought us back to our roots when we were anti-graffiti. So it wasn't like, you know, turning an apple into an orange. It was about our core values were the same, but we could expand our work in a way that had such integrity and resonance. Anyway, so I crossed paths with Arthur Evans. He said, I want to work with Mural Arts. I'm like, great. So he said, we have a black box way of doing business in our field. We send bureaucrats into neighborhoods, they knock on doors and they say, hey, I'm from the city, I'm here to help you. And people go, you know, I've received no services, I've received bad services, not interested. So he said, so I want to see if we do a public art project in Southwest Philadelphia with the African immigrant community and African Americans, whether people would feel safer, better. We want you to work with the Children's Crisis Treatment Center. There had been beatings, there had been like all these things were going wrong, and these two groups were completely separate. So we started working, and it was not easy, it was difficult, it was arduous, but over time, people started to see there was a light that was shining on diversity, but there was also something that lifted up commonality, right? And that came out in the design sessions. When people started talking about their lives, there were things in common. And it might sound obvious, oh sure, so what? But it was significant because people were in that room discussing their lives in a meaningful way and listening to each other. And we did this big project. It's at like 56 in Woodland if you want to go see it. And months after that, these two groups hosted a forum on economic development. Like, how fantastic is that, right? So some of the things we see when we're there, and some things happen when we're long gone, but it is that catalytic power of art that Dr. Evans saw that I had seen. He goes, oh, we're going to keep doing this. So then we did the Elwyn Center. And then we had this one project that was on the side of Jev's at 4th and Burke. So, you know, it's Jev's is a great organization. It's also a methadone clinic. People in the neighborhood said, we don't want Jev's here. Jev's wasn't going anywhere. And Jev's was like, wow, you know, we really feel like discriminated against by this neighborhood. And so Dr. Evans said, that's your next site. So we went into Jev's. He said, I want you doing a major project about addiction and recovery. So we said, okay, so we go there, and now our programming is starting to grow. Art education, criminal justice, behavioral health. And we're like, wait a minute, look at this basement. It's just lying here, empty. Oh, let's turn it into an artist studio. So we did. Then we started running programs. And then we started running programs before group therapy. And then the therapist said, wait a minute, when people are in the art program, they seem to be more attentive in group therapy. Like they're coming more to group therapy. So we're like, really? Well, okay, so we'll run more programs. So we became more intentional about the way we delivered our services. And then we got a small grant to work with these evaluators. You saw them in the movie. And Dr. Teebs from the Yale Medical School. And they did a little test. And they said, you know what, you're onto something. People who are part of Mural Arts are staying with their recovery. And so we're like, oh my God, this is fantastic. So at the same time, we're doing this giant 5-story building, right? We're doing all this programmatic work. One day I went there to make a site visit, and there's a line of people. It's like 9 a.m. And I get in this line to go into the building, and I'm sure like I'm in the line for coffee. And I'm like, oh, coffee, I love coffee. I'm like, oh, is this the line for coffee? They're like, what? This is the line to get in the art room. I'm like, the art room? Like there's a demand to get in the art room. I'm like, this is fantastic. I was so excited. And so I got to see all this excitement. And then people would follow me to my car and say, Miss Golden, I no longer feel like an addict. I feel like an artist. I'm like, great. So what do we do? So I'm like, this is good information. So we got up our confidence. We applied to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We got a major grant to embed ourselves in provider agencies around the city in neighborhoods that were struggling, to work with individuals and community, and to assess impact with this group from the Yale Medical School. And we joined forces with Betsy and Ernel and a few other artists, and that is how the Porch Light program came into existence. And I want to tell you something. I just came from the Broad Street Ministry, and it was so inspiring, because what we hear over and over and over again is that the people who are coming to the classes, some of them have been catatonic. Some of them feel like the only way they see themselves is through addiction. There is a sense of isolation and helplessness, a sense of futility that is absolutely overwhelming and profound. And what art does, and I've seen it over the years, I just wasn't able to measure it or do it in as intentional a way, is that art can break that open. It connects people to all that makes you human. It connects people back to the larger world, and it makes them feel whole again. And the fact that we have, and we're announcing our findings in April. You're all invited. I'll make sure to tell Amy, and so you can come to this event because it's fascinating. So we have now data that points to the impact. But I also know that aside from that wonderful nexus of art and science, which I embrace and love, that we see it with our own eyes, that change is happening in individuals and in communities all over the city of Philadelphia, and it's incredibly inspiring. And for us, we're on a mission. This program will expand.
My name is Ernel Martinez. It's such an honor to be here tonight with such distinguished panelists, and I'd like to thank Amy and Sarah and everyone involved for inviting me here. So I'm very, very excited tonight to be back at Penn. As mentioned before, I'm a former student, and sort of my identity of it as an artist was truly sort of formed right here on this campus. As a young person, I actually studied under Jane as a grad student. I took her big picture class, and and that sort of it blew my mind, because it was, as an artist, you sort of spend so much time in your studio focusing on your own work and sort of what you have to say as an artist, right? But after taking that class and doing a project right there in the metro area, it sort of opened my mind in terms of what being an artist could actually mean. Working with the community, becoming an activist, being involved with amazing programs, partnering up with nonprofits all over the city, and doing some really profound work in Philadelphia. And so between that and studying under Terry, who's no longer with us, but he was such a great mentor for me as an artist, he taught me that it was vital as an artist of color is to not only to have access to these communities, but to be responsible for what you do in the public realm, right? So, yeah, I'll just show a few pictures. I'm not going to speak too much on Porch Light. I'm going to speak more on Journey to Home. And so Porch Light was, I was in year 2 of Porch Light, and Porch Light was an amazing project, as Jane mentioned before. It was a 3-year project, and we partnered with Project Home, who provided services for homeless moms and families and women who had problems with addiction. And we did these series of poetry workshops up on Diamond Street at the Rec Center. And from these workshops, we created these poems, and what you're looking at the left is a community poem that was written by all the members within this group. We had, I think, around 20 or so mothers and kids. And the poem was transcribed using these sort of color bars. And what we did is we assigned each letter of the alphabet a color. And we took their poems and created this sort of abstract tapestry, if you will. On the far right is actually like dozens and dozens of poems transcribed. And so you have this sort of data style image. And around that band, this color band that wraps around that image, it's actually the poem that you're looking at your left right there. So that was a very layered and complex project. It was very emotional. A lot of the content we're working with was truly, truly powerful and inspiring. I'm going to move on to my next project because Betsy's going to speak a lot more on Porch Light than I will. So, but this is a project I did last year, and it's actually part 2 of another project. The initial project was called A Place to Call Home, and this is called A Journey to Home. And A Journey to Home is was a year-long project with homeless teens in Philadelphia. It was meant to illuminate some of the challenges with housing insecurity amongst teens and homelessness. At any given time here in Philadelphia, there's roughly 2,000 to 5,000 teens that are homeless, and a large portion of that are LGBTQ. There's a much higher percentage of gay and lesbian kids that are homeless because of the fact that they came out to their parents. So that leaves them very vulnerable to all kinds of things and issues. And so over that year or so, I worked with a lot of kids from the attic, kids from other programs with Mural Arts, and we converted a storefront in West Philly, right there on Lancaster Ave. And in that storefront, we created a safe space for kids to sort of share their stories and to make art. It was a very collaborative effort. We had several artists working within that project. I was just one of them. Cheryl Walensky was the other co-lead. Jared Wood was a teaching artist. Taji Nall who's a fashion designer. We had actors and activists being a part of this project. So it was a very layered and complex project. But what we did was we used art as a platform for young people to share their stories. And part of that whole experience was collaborating with Dr. Canuccio, who was mentioned before. Dr. Canuccio, who actually teaches here at Penn, she contributed with this photo project called Photolicitation. And photolicitation is basically using photography to sort of tell stories, right? And we use photography and interviews to sort of share some of the stories that these young people are going through, and to really sort of humanize the issue of homelessness and its impact on these young people. And so what we have here is a corner on 42nd and Lancaster, and on that corner we have a large container as part of this project. So we had the storefront where we had these monthly activities with visiting artists and performance, and we had these sort of exhibitions / teen hub space where young people could come in, and we have music, we have food, we have discussion panels, all kinds of activities. And that sort of fostered a lot of conversations around homelessness in Philadelphia. And it sort of allowed these young people to express themselves visually. And so once we sort of became comfortable in that conversation, we moved it to sort of the public realm, right? So how do you create public art and have such sort of personal stories that are quite painful? You know, kids are very, very secretive with issues of homelessness. You know, if you're homeless, if you're couch surfing, you don't want to share that, right? So that was a challenge for us. So how do you have that conversation in the public realm and still respect what these young people are going through and not exploit them? So that was one of the challenges with this project. So what we did here was we converted this container, and this container was sort of symbolic on a lot of levels. It was meant to create a platform for this conversation with the community within that neighborhood. And we had a series of events. Myself, the young people involved, built these tables and these benches, and we had these coordinated conversations with the community. There was music out there, there was food out there, and the kids were empowered through their voices. They made picket signs, they did activities out there, and they sort of stepped out of that shadow of being homeless and being embarrassed about that reality and those challenges. And they sort of took it by the handle and was empowered. And so for me, it was a very, very sort of moving project. And I think we have a couple images from this I can show you. That's the container. And if you look through the door, you'll see one of the murals. It's actually a co-design mural with Shira. And the other one, that's the full design right there that you're looking at. So it was this sort of corridor, this business corridor in Lancaster that was sort of totally transformed with art, with color, and sort of depicting these different journeys that the young people were on. And the reason why the project's called Journey to Home is because it was about sort of these different points in the lives of these young people and them sort of trying to transition into adulthood, but also sort of find housing for themselves and being empowered through that. But either way, a lot of our participants within this program actually found jobs. There's this great kid, Mark, who's been involved with Mural Arts for many years. And Mark, his early 20s, Mark had dropped out of high school. And when we did the first project, which was A Place to Call Home, Mark was sort of struggling with himself. He didn't know what he would do. And Mark came to me one day, and he was like, man, I don't know, I just took this, I'm thinking about taking my GED, this and that, this and that. And I got on Mark. I got on Mark really, really hard. I said, Mark, you got to get your D. You're too bright, you're too smart, you have too much potential. And at the time, Mark was actually between houses. He was recently kicked out of his mom's house because of her husband. And he was sort of struggling with what he should do. And anyway, so Mark at that point was at the Covenant House, which is for homeless teens in Philly. And Mark came to me, and I encouraged him to take his GED. And he finally took it and passed. And so Mark came back to Journey to Home a couple years later, and he was a part of the program. And Mark was very, very proud that he had recently got his own apartment. He found a job, he got his own apartment. And he was telling the story about when he first moved into his apartment and he had his keys, the first thing he did was took off his shoes when he walked in his house. And he walked in his house barefoot so he could rub his feet on the carpet, because he's never had his own space before. So there's so many sort of wonderful stories like this that's associated with these projects, and for me it's just really such an honor and a privilege to be an artist, and to be working with such an amazing colleagues and a leader like Jane. You know, Jane's really done an amazing job of laying down the groundwork for artists and public art in the city of Philadelphia. She's literally transformed this whole city. It's become a landmark, a national landmark. It's become, I think, sort of on the forefront of all public art in the world. You know, I think only Chicago could rival Philadelphia, but they don't have, in my opinion, the focus. You know, you have artists from all over the world sort of knocking on the doors to be a part of this. So for me, it's tremendously humbling, and I truly love what I do.
My name is Betsy Casañas. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, where I grew up, because I think that plays a huge part in all of the work that I've been doing. I grew up on 4th and Cambria. When I was a little kid, I was free to ride around the neighborhood on my bicycle to visit my neighborhood friends. At 14, that freedom was taken away because the streets of North Philadelphia became a war zone. Many of my childhood friends dropped out of school, started dealing on the corners. Some got locked up and many were shot down and killed, especially the boys. In memory, murals began decorating the neighborhood walls. Growing up in North Philadelphia has impacted everything that I have done up until now. But at 19 was when everything started. At 19, I was a full-time student. I became pregnant with my first child. Not knowing what to do, I went to a local community center, Taller Puertorriqueño. And I was like, I'm an artist. And, you know, luckily on the second interview, the woman who was interviewing me was late. And there was a young kid behind the desk and told me, you know, the artist that was supposed to be here never showed up. And there's 18 students in the back, and he sent me back there. So at 19, you know, the woman came 20 minutes later, apologetic, but then the classroom was filled with these 18 kids who were working with whatever scraps I could find, so I was hired. Weeks later, I started working at the Village of the Arts and Humanities after recommendations. And before my 9 months with Archangel, I had just finished my first mural with the Network Arts Philadelphia on Frida Kahlo in a school in North Philadelphia. So when I was 19, I became a public artist, I became a teacher, I became a mother. So it all happened around the same time. I started working with Mural Arts a few years later. In 2007, I was working on a mural on 5th and Dolphin. It was on the history of Puerto Rican migration. You know what? I forgot to show my slides. Can I? So this is actually my neighborhood. This is the corner of the neighborhood. This is what the kids would do. There weren't any recreational spaces, so the kids would drag old dirty mattresses, and you know, they would use them as a place to play. So in 2007, I was contracted by Mural Arts to paint this mural. It was on the history of Puerto Rican migration into Philadelphia. And the mural was in front of an abandoned playground where rods of metal stuck out of the ground and little children still played. The neighborhood was very similar to where I grew up. Everyday people were exposed to drug activity, gun violence, physical and verbal abuse, drug and alcohol addiction, and constant noise. Semilla Arts Initiative, that's when I founded Semilla Arts Initiative, when I was working on that particular mural. We really wanted to do something. There weren't any neighborhoods. You go into these communities, you go into these neighborhoods, and you know, there's such a lack of resources. You don't go into Center City and find abandoned playgrounds that, you know, are a risk for people to get hurt. I mean, while we were there was, you know, multiple times where we were caught in the crossfire because, again, it was a very hot drug corner. In the beginning, we took a guerrilla approach because we had nothing. We took a guerrilla approach in an effort to begin the transformation in the neighborhood. We started working with the neighbors. We started working with the kids. We started working with local poets and writers. And I was a teacher at the Charter High School for Architecture and Design, and I brought 140 of my students out to the streets. They were also working on the murals. My classroom was set up as a mural making studio, so my students were able to participate in a lot of the murals. I think growing up in one of the hottest corners in North Philadelphia played a huge impact on my approach in the classroom, on my work on the streets with Semilla. And it was the perfect foundation to develop the curriculum for Porch Light. So this is year one. I worked with Porch Light for all 3 years. Year one, I wanted to design and I wanted to work with the patients, but I wanted it to be based on simplicity. I didn't want to go in there and I didn't want to create this huge mural that they didn't feel like they could recreate. I wanted to create and expose them to really simple approaches to creating. So we worked with wood cutouts. If you look at the central piece, the orange wall, we created just a bright wall with cutouts of wood that we stained in cherry brown colors. We made 2-color murals on silhouettes of banana trees. We hung flowers. We, created every section of the space. We transformed the space where they were receiving treatment. So any common areas, there were about 10 rooms in the space and we covered everything. And the idea was, again, to play with the idea of creating spaces. How do you transform a space with color? When I first walked in there, it looked like any other mental health clinic where you had dingy white walls, dingy beige walls. By the time we were done, just repeating on what Jane said, I mean, the patients, they would come in and the people would say, the artists have arrived. The artists have arrived. So, when you're doing this kind of work, you see the impact that it has on the individuals participating in it almost immediately. So that was year one. Year one was, again, based on really simple approaches that can be easily replicated. The idea of how different colors, how you can bring them together. Another thing I wanted to focus on was the idea of cleanliness, the idea of organization. If you keep a really organized space, an organized studio, then you feel good when you walk into the place. You feel good and you're ready to continue working. If you walk into an area that's completely chaotic, then you're not really sure where to begin. So that was year one. Year two was a little bit different. I did want to do a really large scale mural, and the idea for me was to overwhelm. Because of the lack of resources in these particular neighborhoods in North Philadelphia, there's never enough. There's never enough. So I wanted to create something that was going to be an abundance. This mural was ridiculously labor intensive. Every single part of the mural was a pattern. Every single part of the mural, every pattern was lined in gold. With this particular mural, it's surrounded by, it's 2 women embracing, and it's surrounded by a mandala. The mandala was supposed to represent APM's connection to the community. APM was the organization that I was working with. And APM started decades ago by several visionaries of the community that wanted an organization that focused on starting an organization that really dealt with the needs of the community, really focused on the people that weren't getting what they needed. And this mural was supposed to represent that connection to that community. And then I wanted to play with the idea of the mandala, right? Your connection to the universe, the mural's connection to the community, but the idea of patterns, right? Patterns and repetition, and all the mundane things that you kind of have to do in order to create a mural, or mixing of the colors. But if you think about patterns, it silences you. I don't know what it is about painting, but when you walk into a space and you come together communally and you start painting, there's a calmness that happens. And it's important with communities like this, communities that are struggling with drug and alcohol addictions, communities that are struggling with violence, to create a space where there is a moment where you can be calm, where things do become quiet. So Porch Light Year 2 was based on really being present during all of these mundane activities that we had to do to complete the mural, whether it was, again, painting the parachute cloth, priming it. They were part of every single aspect of the creation of the mural. They were part of the projection, they were part of the painting. They designed certain sections on the far left. And then at the end, I received a great compliment of the mural. Somebody wrote to me and said, "When I see your mural, I want to sing." And I thought that was so beautiful. And I was thinking, you know, for year 3, I want the neighborhood to sing. Mm-hmm. I want the neighborhood to feel the same way. So year 3, I wanted to design the whole block. So the mural is on the left side, my mural on the top. I designed for 47 buildings. And although we didn't get the 47 buildings, we got about 30 people to agree to what we wanted. The idea for year 3 was really the focus on the community, the focus on the people. They're large portraits, and you see some of them in the bottom, some of the ones in process in the bottom, where we're really focusing on the people who are inhabiting the neighborhood. I had patients that were part of year 3. The cool thing about the patients was the patients that were with me year 1 became my crew members year 2. They were paid crew members year 2. Year 3, because this final piece was for 30 buildings, I had to have multiple studios going. So I had one studio at APM Porch Light. I had one at my personal studio, and there was constantly people on the walls. But then my first year patients started facilitating the projects at APM Studios while I was in another space. So it was a really nice way to see how they developed, how they really took ownership of these projects, and how they felt confident enough to lead the others, the newer patients in the programs. So this is mine.
Great, thank you 3 of you for sharing these really beautiful stories. And it's exciting to hear you talk about being involved with such a wide range of people. I want to just ask you maybe just one question before we break it out to the audience, and that's to reflect a bit like Betsy did on your own story and your own journey, and how either Porch Light or Murals have been part of that. I think the 2 of you have come from other places to live in Philadelphia, and how is this journey and being part of Murals made this feel like home? How has it been part of your own personal growth and sense of wholeness, which obviously has been part of so many of the people that you've worked with?
Yeah, totally. I actually grew up in LA, and some of the first artwork I saw as a young person was work by Ken Twitchell, who's a famous muralist. And I would take this bus route to school because I was commuting, and I would always see this mural. I forget what the name of it was, but of this man. It just sort of looked hyper realistic, and and I just sort of fell in love with art at that point in time. And so 30 years later, somehow I'm in the city of Philadelphia. I see another Ken Twitchell mural, Dr. J, which is pretty iconic here in Philly. And so there's always been this connection. And for me, a huge part of me being in Philadelphia was Penn. I came to Penn and fell in love with the city. The work that I've done in the surrounding area it sort of influenced me in a lot of different ways. It's also sort of showed sort of the distinction between sort of being on campus and the reality of Philadelphia. And so, as an artist and being involved on the community level, and sort of having these conversations and this sort of dialogue with with people in the neighborhood and some of the challenges that we're going through. And it really connected to me as a person who sort of grew up in inner city LA. You know, there was a lot of parallels, issues of drugs, issues of violence, issues of crime, and so forth. So I could sort of have both worlds where I can make my work as an artist, but also sort of serve the community that I was a part of as well. And you know, and I think that in itself is not only developed who I am as an artist, but I think a lot of other artists here in Philadelphia. We have 200 plus artists working with Mural Arts or some sort of other programs in the city that's sort of doing the same thing. And you know, so I think the city sort of has a sort of heightened consciousness in terms of what public art is and what good public art is, right? And so being involved in that conversation as an artist is really quite a lot of fun.
If you want to talk about that.
Well, I grew up with parents who talked to me a lot when I was little about the WPA. My father passed away in December, so I've had some time to reflect on his great influence on me. To be young and look at pictures of art by Ben Shahn and Thomas Hart Benton and Grant Wood, and to really be stirred to think about that art and social change, or art and politics, are not necessarily separate. So I was always I painted a lot when I was young, and I saw myself as a social realist painter. And I went to Stanford and painted large. And then when I moved down to Los Angeles, I got a job. I was, it was just a boring job that I didn't really like. And I really thought I'd go to law school, actually.
I'm glad you did.
And I drove around and saw these extraordinary murals, and I just thought, well, I thought back on what I had seen as a kid, and I just thought that would be so great to paint a mural. So I called up the LA Mural Program, and they said, well, yeah, we do give out 10 grants a year to artists, but you're past the deadline. So I said, well, what if I wasn't? They said, well, you have to find a wall, you have to do a design about a community issue, and they were like, look, you're just past the deadline, so we don't have to have this conversation. So I hung up, and I ended up going out, and I found a wall. I did a design about a community issue. I asked people in my neighborhood if they would work with me if I got this hypothetical mural job. And they're like, yeah, I guess, whatever. It's a hypothetical mural. Sure, we'll say yes. Why not? And then I applied, and they told me, like, you're past the deadline. Like, what are you understanding? And like, you see how I drive the city of Philadelphia crazy, right? You can see how I do this with everybody. So then finally, I called them every day for 3 months. Finally, after 3 months, I picked up the phone. They said, is this Jane Golden? I said, yes, it is. They said, we hope we never hear from you again. I'm like, who's this? They said, this is the LA Mural Program. You have the grant. So I was like, what? And the grant was like $300 to do a mural like 100 feet long and 20 feet high. And of course, I had no idea how to do a mural. I'd lied on my application. I said, I did murals all over Stanford's campus, but of course, my paintings were big. So then I researched mural painting, and then I started painting this mural in Santa Monica, and it was like such a wonderful experience, because it was like people started talking to me about neighborhood concerns and social issues. I'm like, oh my God, this is great. Art for everyone. And then there was like a dedication. People were like, get someone famous to dedicate it. I'm like, I'm 22 from New Jersey. I don't know anyone famous. And they said, Jane Fonda lives down the street. So I went down the street and knocked on her door. She answered, oddly enough. And then I said, would you cut the ribbon at my mural dedication? She said, yes. I love to see young women. I've seen you working and moving scaffolding and lifting paint. Whatever you want. And of course, now I'd ask her for a donation. Then I'm like, well, you could bring friends. I didn't know what to say. So it was like, Jane Fonda. So anyway, so she came, and then I ended up like working with kids on probation, and I then became really sick. I have lupus, and I think that was such a humbling, leveling experience. I came back east, and then I didn't want to go back to LA, but I was hired by the Anti-Graffiti Network, and I have to say that next to my dad and my mom, I give huge credit to Wilson Good and my former boss, Tim Spencer, because Anti-Graffiti gave me access to every community in the city. I never would have had it, and I started meeting these graffiti writers that had enormous talent, but had no opportunities. Their talent had just gone unrecognized. It was shameful that we do that in our society, and it politicized me in a way that I hadn't been, right? Theoretically, I thought a lot about political issues and social issues. I worked along major corridors in LA. I hadn't really thought deeply about social change. Anti-graffiti put me right in the mix of it, and it was sort of like, what are you gonna do? We're a city agency, and it challenged me in so many ways. And I just felt like, oh my God, I have found my calling. And then, so when Anti-Graffiti closed down, I actually was gonna go to law school. I applied, I got into law school, and my brother is a lawyer. Thankfully, he said, don't go to law school. I'm like, why not? He said, you should run an art program for the city. I'm like, there isn't one. He said, well, start one. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, oh my God, I could go talk to Ed Rendell. So I went to see Ed Rendell. I said, I think we should have an art program. He's like, what? Like, who are you? I'm like, you know, he didn't say that. He's like, because he knew about anti-graffiti. He goes, well, I think you've been the steam engine for the anti-graffiti network. And where would you want to be in the city of Philadelphia? And I said, I'd like to work for Michael DiBerardinis at the Department of Recreation. That would be a dream. Because I knew he was like an activist and a rabble-rouser and really a visionary guy. So he said, okay. So I really, thankfully, I thank Ed Rendell so much. He said, come up with a name for yourself. We said, Mural Arts Program. He goes, Jane Golden, you're in charge. I wasn't in charge of much. We had a totally little budget, right? But it was like, yay, we're a pro art program. And we just started going 100 miles an hour and never looked back. That's a quick version.
Betsy, you talked a bit about
it,
sort of, where the neighbor came from. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
No, I think.
Are there questions you guys want to ask each other about your work? Or, I mean, obviously you work together, but this is a rare opportunity outside the office maybe to dig a little deeper before we invite the audience to participate.
Sure. I've known Betsy for many years already, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for Betsy and in your work, your personal work. And so one of the challenges of being an artist is sort of working with the community, working with funders, working with all these different sort of layers, even within politics. And do you ever feel as if your voice as an individual artist is ever lost or challenged in that process?
That's a great question. I feel like I have as many personal works as I do public work. I have loads of paintings. I have over 50 some murals in different parts of the world, in different parts of Philly, and I have a really extensive body of personal work as well, and I'm constantly painting in the studio. So for me at least, I don't think, I know that it's definitely a struggle for many to continue doing the personal work because we start working on these huge public projects, but I feel like the public projects, you know, I think they inspire a lot of the work that I'm doing in the studio. A lot of the studio work is really personal. It's mostly self-portraits or you know, projects that I have done with communities, but it's all really just autobiographical. And I think a lot of the techniques that I've used on the murals or on the paintings, I've kind of, you know, brought them together. But no, I don't think so. I feel like I've started everything at the same time. You know, I was an art student at a really, really young age. I started painting when I was 14 and I wasn't allowed to go outside anymore. And I think that I was always used to doing multiple things at the same time. So painting at home, painting in the streets, teaching were all kind of, that's just what I did. So I don't think it's really affected. How about you?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So as an artist, you again, like I mentioned before, you're always trying to find your own voice as an artist, and that's sort of a lifelong journey,
yeah.
Right? And you know, as a student here at Penn, you have these critiques. You sort of have all this feedback through visiting artists, through staffing, through everyone, and you know, you spend a lot of time internalizing things and sort of what you're going through. For me, that sort of changed when you start to have conversations with other people who are dealing with different issues, right? And so over the years, I've been doing public art for about 12 years here in Philly. So that, it sort of evolved, and you sort of had this sort of personal work, and you had this public work. But over the last 4 or 5 years, they've sort of just meshed and become one. So, you know, as Jane mentioned before, that we're not just doing murals in Philadelphia, we're doing so many other things. We're doing installation, we're doing sculpture, we're doing performance art. There's all this stuff going on in Philly. So the landscape has totally changed. And that means that there's a lot of different opportunities to express yourself visually. And so for me, that sort of dichotomy or that sort of personal public friction just ceased to exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd have to say, like, for us as a program, that it's really, and I think when we did the Steve Powers Love Letter project, what was interesting is people said when they looked at Steve's work in West Philly, people said, well, that doesn't look like a Mural Arts mural. And I was like, well, that's good. And so I thought, you know, it's really important to listen to the artists, because I think artists are some of the best thinkers in our society, right? And I think we started to really listen to artists more. And I think that's when we were, you know, like, Betsy has ideas or Nell has ideas, like that's really important to pay attention to. And as a program, we had to course correct and evolve and be open and curious and be like sponges and really soak up not just best practices around the country and the world, but also really listen to what artists were saying.
Great, thanks. Well, I think at this point we'd love to open up the conversation to involve all of you. Hopefully folks have some questions or some comments. We've got a mic here, so why don't you just raise your hand and we'll work around the room.
This may seem like an odd question, but I'm wondering at the end of some of the Porch Light project work, whether the people involved, clients, people being served in the mental health system, addiction, whether they felt a sense of loss in some ways, that the project or the work was over, and what ways do you try to keep an ongoing engagement with the people who actually benefited at the time that they were working collaboratively, in collaboration?
I think with me, a lot of the people that I worked with kept in contact with me, and I didn't stop being a muralist. So I'm continuing to work. I continue work in my studio. I have, a gallery in North Philly, so I have constant projects always going on, and I invite them. So they come to my personal studio and they help me on various projects. I have, a community garden in Philadelphia. They've come out and helped me with those. For me, at least, a lot of the individuals that were participating, from year 1 up until year 3 have kept in contact with me. Not all of them, but those who really needed it continued with me, and they still come to my studio and they still help me. And when I'm not working, they're asking me, when are we starting?
So, but I would say you ask a really good question, and it's something that we struggle with, because the truth is, all those agencies, like Porch Light goes on now. So now Porch Light is at the Broad Street Ministry, and we have a program in South Philly called Southeast by Southeast, where we're working with the Burmese, the Bhutanese, and Nepali community, and it's about reacclimating to a new country, and it's about trauma and resilience, and it's a fantastic project, right? And then we're doing big signature projects, like we're doing a major initiative around President Obama's My Brother's Keeper, and the role of trauma in communities of color with men. So I'm really happy about that. But the fact that we were at STOP and APM and Project Home, and there's a finite pool of money, and we have to move on and really spread the wealth around, is like slightly heartbreaking, and it's hard I find it really hard to let go of that. So we have we have alumni groups, people from some other programs, like there were several people from JEVS at James Burns Studio today working. We have a very large program. We have an internship program, apprenticeship programs, we have training programs. We have programs for people who are coming out of prison. We have so many programs. We have art education programs. We try to plug people in when we can. And people come back. Sometimes they assist on projects. So we really try to be cognizant of the fact that we want people to see mural arts as that it's a pathway. It's not like we're one and done. And that is one way of doing it. And the other is that, quite frankly, to be really vigilant and tenacious as it relates to funding from both the public and private sectors, and to raise that flag to say this work is important, and just be relentless about it.
There's a question in the back.
I read a quote recently that art is not a reflection of reality, but a hammer with which to shape it. And in that vein, I understand you said that the Mural Arts Program has kind of an anti-graffiti approach, but many public spaces, the art that's produced, whether it be musical or visual, contains with it sort of an actual social commentary. I mean, comes from a place of frustration or oppression or repression, whatever. And so I'm wondering, with an anti-graffiti policy.
Well, did I say that tonight, that we have an anti-graffiti approach?
I thought you said that was part of the roots of the Mural Arts Program.
Oh, well, that was a different program, the Anti-Graffiti Network.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I just want to be clear, because I always get asked this question. So
okay.
When we became Mural Arts, it was a totally different program.
Okay.
And it was our foundation.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Even then, how might the Mural Arts Program of Philadelphia be able to channel or retain that critical lens and not just merely reflect what is beautiful. Because in many ways, like even the East Coast style graffiti, which is just black and white, it's hard, it's bleak, it's a reflection of the situation from which it's produced, you know what I mean?
Right.
So obviously this is very beautiful, this mural here, it's very colorful, and it might brighten people's day, but how is it actually changing, maybe tangibly, what produces the inequities that, you know, produce what you try to address?
Well, I'm going to answer for Betsy, but then Betsy should answer for Betsy, because I'm going to say that what something like this does is it holds a mirror up to people, and it says your life counts. And if you know Philadelphia, then you know we have an intractable rate of poverty in this city. And there are people in the city who are just living in the margins. And when some people think of Philly, they think, oh, hip, edgy Philly, isn't this great? Lots of restaurants, what a scene, young people, yay, right? Well, like we all travel in neighborhoods where it's not so, there's not such boosterism, right? And there's tremendous need. And why shouldn't people have art, right? I mean, does art have to be confined to museums and galleries or in Center City? You know, it's like everybody should have access to beauty. And what we've seen is that this beauty, by representing people in a way that is fair and respectful with dignity, it's empowering, it's inspiring, it's a catalyst, it leads to other things. People think, well, what's next? And they should say, what's next? And so that's why people come to us and they say, you know what, we're really interested in a community garden, or we're interested in, there's dangerous houses that should be cited for demolition, or we have no programs in this community, we should have something. So we connect people. Betsy has community garden, she has a gallery, she has a studio right in the neighborhood in Norris Square. I mean, it's, you know, so like all these other things are happening as a result of this mural. So in a way, this mural might be an image that is beauty, but beauty can be deeply political. And if there's one thing that I have seen in 30 years of doing this work, is that that statement is absolutely true. In 1985, 86, and 87, when we did waterfall murals in neighborhoods, but then people would say, wait a minute, that vacant lot was filled with syringes and crack vials, we don't want it. We were like, right, what should we do? Let's change it. And then people would say, you know what, I've been trying to get a hold of L&I for 10 years and no one ever calls me back, because we're in a neighborhood where no one calls me back. And we'd say, oh, no, that's gonna change. We were a group of artists, what did we know, right? So we intuitively and instinctively just flew into action. And suddenly that waterfall mural became a beacon of hope, and it led to other changes. And no one can ever tell me that that wasn't political, because I feel it very strongly. But I also want to say, one thing is that now if you look at mural arts and you look at the murals around the city, a lot of the murals, if you look at Healing Walls about the impact and consequences of violent crime, that is like a very, very somber, difficult image to look at. So there's no one, I don't think that you can generalize, not that I saw that you did that, but some of the images are difficult to look at and some are more pleasant to look at. The impact, I would like to think, is consistently strong, but the imagery is different. And we also are, I mean, at Anti-Graffiti, we couldn't use spray, but we use spray now, right? I mean, I can't and won't condone writing on walls, obviously, that's illegal, but using spray as a medium and an art form to make a statement is supported at Mural Arts.
I think the process, because we're a Mural Arts program, our process in the communities and our process in creating the work is completely different than graffiti art. I was part of multiple urban art festivals in the past year, and it's different because it's fast, right? It's fast. You have these absolutely incredible artists that come out and they do these beautiful murals that really speak on the stories of the people. But what we're doing is a little bit different, because I'm working with that corner mural. I've worked with over 900 people. I've worked with students that came from different parts of the United States that were on missionary trips. So it's about the process. I feel like the process, it was a year-long process for the corner one and another year for the other one. We're taking a much longer time to create these pieces, but there's so many more people that are getting involved that are from the community. I'm not working with artists. I'm working with people from the neighborhoods. I'm working with people that don't have these kinds of programs. So definitely having spaces like this where people can be an active part in the transformation of their own community is political.
Yeah, it is. I totally agree with you. And it's exciting. It's totally exciting. And Ernel with Journey to Home, this young man stood up at the dedication. He pulled out a key and he said, "I have a key," and it was like so thrilling. And then people who worked on Journey to Home just spoke. Was a Housing Alliance conference, and they did such an eloquent job in front of like 800 people that people in the audience were inspired and set up like this little trust fund for the kids who came through Journey to Home, so that if they need things, right, they need a suit for job interviews, or there's certain basic needs they might have, that they could access this funding. I mean, that's how inspired they were by the young people that Ernel worked with, and that's like fantastic.
Do you want to answer?
No, I think these two did a great job answering the question.
Thanks, and thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Somebody in the back who had a question.
Sorry, I just wanted to, I don't think you addressed the young man's question, which is, what's the relationship of the work you do to graffiti artists? What's the relationship you have to graffiti artists?
What's the relationship of what we do to graffiti artists? I'm not sure I understand the question. The relationship, we work with artists, and some of them use spray, and some of them don't. I mean, people are sort of searching all the time, because we used to be the Anti-Graffiti Network, and now we're Mural Arts. Like, what is it about? Like, I feel like for the rest of my life, I'm going to have some connection with graffiti. Like, I worked with graffiti writers for a long time, and then when we became Mural Arts, different program, we opened our doors to all kids. And for the last 6-7 years, we've been working with 1 million artists from all over the world who work different ways. How and Nazem, who did a piece in Center City, they came up as graffiti writers. Now they're seen as street artists. They travel all over and do fantastic work. They did a beautiful, like a brilliant piece that's half graphite and half spray. Steve Powers, 50 love letter projects. Some of them are with spray and some of them are done with paint. So, because he's like the juxtaposition of graffiti and 1950s sign painting, which I really love, actually. So, I mean, I think it's looking at it, spray to us is a tool. So you use it in different ways that are expressive and inspiring and uplifting. But you also could use graphite. You could use acrylic paint. As Ernel said, maybe Ernel has an idea to do it. He has done installation. Or Betsy comes and says, I want to do something sculptural in a community garden. Like, that to me, it's spray. It's a tool. And we use it in the public process, but just like we use other things. And I think it's interesting. For me, graffiti is interesting because I think that the worlds of graffiti, street art, muralism, and public art are all influencing and inspiring each other in contemporary public art practice. And we have a major exhibition that we're hosting, that we're putting together in the fall of 2015, called Open Source, where 14 artists, some of them are from Philly, some of them are coming to Philly, are going to be doing phenomenal work around this city. And that the discourse is going to be about how those 4 areas influence, inspire, and talk to each other. I think that says a lot about where contemporary public art is now, that we're judging less and instead learning from each other. So there's that hierarchy that existed when I started in Philly that said murals were like, people used to say to me, that's nice, but isn't that sort of like social work? And I would say, well, I think social work's a noble profession. What are you talking about? But there was public art and there was murals and then there was graffiti over there. The world is changing now, and that's a good thing. It's less siloed.
Yeah, got a question down front?
I have a question about the tours that they do for the public art. Are you connected with that, and do you have literature that
yes,
connects you to
We have a great tour program. We have walking tours. We have about 7 different routes for our tour program. We also have a tour for Porch Light. We have our tour for our criminal justice work. And then we have general tours. We have a tour called the Masterpieces. So you can do Masterpieces West, Masterpieces East. We feel tours are important because we want people to not just see the work, but to understand the stories of the work. And we actually have 40 docents who are trained, and about 18,000 people annually come on mural tours. And I think that's great, and many of those people are coming from out of town and going into neighborhoods all over Philadelphia and seeing things that are going right. And again, it's about sort of like, let's tell the story of all of Philadelphia, not just Center City. So, and you go to our web, I'm sorry, didn't even answer your question. So if you go to our website, you'll see a whole section on tours, and I brought some business cards tonight, so if people want more information, you can just contact me.
Great,
thank you for that question.
Corey has a question.
Jane, you were very clear about how, as you worked with different city agencies, you were able to continue pushing the boundaries of art and social change by looking at other partners and their missions. And one of my questions is, what do you think universities could and should be doing now that you've really tapped into city agencies in new and novel ways, and I'm sure there's more to be done? And maybe as a warm-up answer, Amy, you said that that was one of the best days of your career. In what ways has this partnership been useful for your own research and your own teaching, and your sense about new frontiers, about how these kinds of partnerships are mutually beneficial and ways we can go with them?
That's a good question. Do you want to answer first?
Well, I think what we're doing with Moore College of Art is sort of a clue for the future. We're going to be the laboratory for 3 new graduate programs. So I think that, like I teach at Penn because I think it's great for students to know about the theory of social change. I think it's really good for people to understand that in order to make change, you work sometimes, it's not always top down, it's bottom up, it's ground up, right? And that sort of how you weave together people and money to move the needle. And I think that, I'm really interested in infiltrating universities even more to see how, sort of that notion of being both highly aspirational and intellectual, but also very, very pragmatic can work. So like you and I have talked about sort of a multidisciplinary class, like how do you take that class and then you go out into the community and you do some major transformation. And to be honest, when I started teaching at Penn, we did that more because Mural Arts had the budget to subsidize that. When 2008 happened and our budget shrunk some, we weren't able to be quite as scrappy. But I think that some years at Penn gave us a clue how to really absolutely do some bigger extraordinary work. So I like how Moore is thinking. Moore is thinking, oh, I want to get students out of the classroom. I want them to meet extraordinary people like Betsy and Ernel. I want them to work with them and really work up close with the criminal justice work and behavioral health and art education. And I would love to see more universities and art schools in this city take advantage of it. I mean, art schools and universities are calling us from all over the world, but it's like, hey, here in Philly, we'd like to see that happen.
Yeah. I've worked with multiple universities and I've offered alternative spring breaks. I have a house on Norris Square where I could house about 15 students. And I've had students from various universities come to the house, spend a week at the house, and work on whatever projects that we were working on. I've also linked up with students that were interested either in social work, interested in public art, interested in painting and understanding how to create murals, come to the studio and do an internship, stay in the studio space and work with me and any projects that we're working on, in the neighborhood, whether it's in the gallery, whether it's in the community, whether we're working on a major project, a mural.
Can I come for spring break to your house?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a great question, Corey. I think it really makes a lot of sense being here at Penn, this elite institution with just tremendous resources to have you folks here, and obviously you being a part of product and you teaching here, Jane. I think that one of the great things about being at Penn is that everybody's learning and growing all the time. It's what we're tasked with doing, and I think for me that process of having to negotiate sort of neighborhood boundaries and talking with artists and all different kinds of folks was really enlightening. And I think that some of the other neighborhoods that the projects have gotten Penn students out there are really exciting. For me, sort of thinking about where do you put I worked on a mural with Mural Arts on your CV, like at Penn, right? I mean, it's an interesting challenge, and yet it's something that I'm really proud of. And I think trying to figure out how, as a scholar, and as a human being, sort of coming to terms with sort of living in this city, like how do I share that experience with students? And the best way I've been is, take students on a tour of the 7th Ward, and, I tell them a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and we come around the corner and go, bam, there's the mural. And, they get it, like they feel it. But it's a great question. I don't know the answer.
But also we recruit, we definitely recruit a lot of the Penn students, and a number of my students have gone on to run nonprofits in the city. And they will cite that sort of that semester with Mural Arts as being sort of a really transformative, which is fantastic.
I think folks here are really hungry to feel a part of Philadelphia, and I know that that you have this in the work that you do, and having lived here, and the way you talked about sort of being at Penn and then feeling this connection to the city. I think even though you can kind of tease undergraduates like, don't go past 40th Street or something. Like, I think that we all really yearn to feel connected to this just incredible city, and to feel connected to some of the more difficult elements that you're talking about, to not be scared of the Badlands, and that mural arts is one really wonderful way. And I think work in schools is another way to really to forge that connection. Let's see if we've got one last question. Professor Severino.
Hi, it was a great evening, and I have a question, or really just to ask you to elaborate on the process, because you talked about 2 projects in particular a lot, but the process of outreach into the neighborhoods when a neighborhood requests a mural or when you want to put a mural. So just talking about, because maybe some people don't know how that process actually works and how you come up with the concept of what mural you're going to put there. I'd like you to talk about that a little bit, and working with folks and coming up with the idea.
So would that be from? Well, there are 5 ways murals can happen. One is there's a waiting list. And people can apply for you could apply for a mural. That's you just and they're on the waiting list. The waiting list has like thousands of people on it, which I think is fantastic because the demand exceeds our ability to do it, which means people want art in this city, which is great. Second way is the work connects with a department in mural arts. So Betsy will do a project with Porch Light, or Ernel might do a project with our restorative justice program. The third is that funders will request something special. Citizens Bank says, we're really interested in workforce development. We want something big and bold. So that's one way. Then the fourth way is that we tackle an issue that the city of Philadelphia is dealing with. Could be around juvenile violence. It could be around truancy, whatever it is. It's like an issue that is a topic that the mayor or city council feel this is really important. The fifth way is that we inaugurated recently an idea challenge so that we have a more intentional way of getting ideas from artists. So Betsy says, I've been thinking about this project and I want to do a series of portraits from North Philadelphia to South Philadelphia about the horrible murder that happened in Mexico. So that's Betsy's idea. So we go, oh, that's a brilliant idea. We love it. We're going to try to make that happen. And I think that's really important. And we can't do a lot of that because we obviously have limited money. But so that's 5 ways. So I feel that's both. We're being open, and in that process too, we're cognizant of what's our body of work over the next few years. How many big, challenging, complex projects do we want to take on? A few artists every year we want to invite from out of town. So who are they? How are we making those decisions? So there's always research going on at Mural Arts. There's something called Mural Lab that is like a think tank where we bring in speakers from across the country and the world to talk about other evolving public art practice. So there's a lot going on that leads to what the choices are. But this is a very good question. It's a serious process, and we respond to it in a very rigorous way.
I guess I wanted you to talk a little bit as well. Once a mural's been designated, for instance, the immigration mural that I was talking with, how you go into a neighborhood and involve the neighborhood.
Well, you do an audit. You have to figure out who are the community organizations, who are the faith-based organizations, the schools, the rec centers. I mean, it's like serious it's research to figure out whose community is this, right? I mean, that's a big, complicated question to answer. Is it your community if you just ride the bus and you wait on the bench? Is it your community if you live 2 blocks away from the mural or 5 blocks away from the mural? So you try to figure out how you define the community. And then we talk to the city council, to the state reps, to the mayor's office, to any other community organization, and then we go about having meetings. And both these artists have been involved in projects where there have been maybe a few meetings, or there could be a dozen meetings. And sometimes the mural is a lightning rod for things like the going wrong, in which case something can blow up. And we had a project in North Philadelphia, we had to hire a Quaker mediator because it was like it tapped into a court of racism, unbeknownst to us. And 200 people came to the meetings like repeatedly until it was resolved. So that's that really good research, knowing something could go wrong anyway, but trying to figure out that definition of who the community is, and up front, what are the goals of this project? What are you trying to do? So you're really cognizant of that. But it's really difficult. It's the public. You're dealing with the public, and it's complex getting people to agree about anything, right? Let alone a major work of public art in your community. The symbolism is so deep, right? Because it represents so much. So much is on the line and is at stake that if we don't do this research well, then we've really dropped the ball.
And also, don't the neighborhood has a vote on what kinds of images then are finally.
If people apply and say they want, like with Betsy and Ernel, often like with Journey to Home, we knew we were doing a project about youth homelessness. But we had to get the community on board with it, and people were like, oh yeah, that's an important issue. You know, Betsy with Porch Light, there was sort of a thematic underpinning, but both these artists have also been involved in projects with us where people want a project, but it's non-specific, and then you have to pull it out of people, like what are we thinking here that we want to do together? I don't know, how would you?
Yeah, it's completely a conversation. It's just really us going into different neighborhoods and having conversations with people. And I think for me, one of the best tools that I've developed over the years was just listening, just really trying to listen to what people have to say. And people community, I mean, the word community is such a complex word, right? There's so many different communities within communities. So that's a challenge in itself. But then kind of listening to what people have to say and then try to sort of coalesce these different opinions and different perspectives into doing some sort of public art. And that's a challenge. Every time it's always different, it's always difficult. But at the end of the day, we have these sort of wonderful works of public art that sort of represent the coalescing of ideas. And we have 4,000 of them here in Philly, so that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, of these thousands of stories and experiences.
Right.
Recently, that listening is an act of love, and I think that's a tribute to the work that you're doing.
And Ernel really said, I think that was well said, that you go in with many more questions than answers.
Great. Well, you might go home with some questions, but we're going to wrap things up now. We should probably have a few minutes after we formally close if you have some burning questions. But thank you so much for joining us, and please join me in thanking our great panelists.